The alarm clock didn't so much wake Ilara as it did confirm her suspicions that the night was over. It was 4:12 a.m., a time when the world was painted in shades of bruised indigo and the only sound was the rhythmic metallic hum of the city's plumbing. She didn't move immediately. She lay still, her back pressed against the thin mattress of the studio apartment, feeling the chill that always managed to seep through the window frame, despite the plastic sheeting she'd taped over it. Beside her, Leo was a small, warm weight under the faded quilt. At 5 years old, his sleep was still deep and trusting, his breath coming in soft, whistling puffs. Ilara watched him for a moment, her heart performing that familiar, painful contraction of love and terror. Every morning began this way, a 5-second grace period where she was just a mother, followed by the crushing weight of being a provider with nothing but 24 empty hours and $2.40 in her checking account. She swung her legs out of bed. The floorboards were ice against her soles. She dressed in the dark, pulling on a thick sweater that had seen better decades and the black trousers required for her first shift at the cafe. She moved like a shadow, practiced and silent. She didn't turn on the overhead light. It was too harsh, too honest. Instead, she used the glow from the street lamp outside to find her boots. By 4:45 a.m., she was standing on the corner of 4th and Main, the wind whipping off the river and biting into her cheeks. The bus was late, as it always was on Tuesdays. She stood among the other ghosts of the early morning, men in grease-stained coveralls, women with tired eyes clutching plastic-wrapped sandwiches. They didn't look at each other. To look was to acknowledge their shared desperation, and they were all too tired for solidarity. When the bus finally hissed to a stop, Ilara climbed aboard, the heat inside smelling of damp wool and old coffee. She found a seat in the back, leaning her forehead against the vibrating glass of the window. She closed her eyes, trying to catch the crumbs of sleep she'd missed, but her mind was already doing the math. Rent is due in 6 days. The electric bill is 14 days past due. Leo needs new shoes. The toes of his sneakers are held together with superglue, and the rain is coming. She arrived at the daily grind at 5:25 a.m. Her manager, a man named Gary, whose personality was as bitter as the burnt espresso he insisted on selling, was already there, tapping his watch. "You're 3 minutes late, Ilara," he grunted, not looking up from his clipboard. "The bus, Gary, I'm sorry. The bus doesn't pay the rent on this storefront. Get the machine started. We've got a line forming." Ilara tied her apron, the strings digging into her waist. For the next 5 hours, she became a machine. She steamed milk until her wrists ached from the weight of the pitchers. She smiled at suits who didn't see her face, only the cup she held. She took orders from women in yoga gear who talked over her as if she were a piece of furniture. "Double shot, oat milk extra hot," a woman said, eyes glued to her phone. "Coming right up," Ilara said, her voice a practiced melody of service. The woman didn't respond. She took the cup, her fingers grazing Ilara's, and walked away without a thank you. Ilara wiped the counter, her cloth catching a stray drop of syrup. She felt a strange, hollow sensation in her chest, the feeling of being invisible. If she disappeared mid-pour, would they even notice? Or would they just wonder why their latte was taking so long? By 10:30 a.m., her shift at the cafe ended, but her day was only beginning. She had 40 minutes to get to her second job at the laundry service 3 blocks over. She ate a granola bar she'd tucked into her pocket, the oats dry and tasteless in her mouth. The laundry was a cavernous, steaming hellscape. The smell of bleach was so thick it felt like it was stripping the lining of her lungs. Ilara spent 4 hours folding sheets for the city's mid-range hotels. Fold, tuck, stack. Fold, tuck, stack. The repetition was numbing, a meditation of cotton and steam. Her hands were perpetually red, the skin around her cuticles cracked and stinging from the chemicals. At 2:45 p.m. she picked up Leo from the community center's after-school program. He ran to her, his face lighting up, and for a moment the exhaustion vanished. "Mommy, look, I drew a dragon." He held up a crinkled piece of paper. The dragon was green and had wings that looked like lightning bolts. Ilara took it, her fingers trembling slightly. "It's beautiful, Leo, the bravest dragon I've ever seen." But as she knelt to zip his jacket, she heard it. A deep, wet rattle in his chest. A cough followed, one of those hollow, barking sounds that makes a mother's blood run cold. "You okay, baby?" she asked, pressing her hand to his forehead. He felt warm, not a furnace, but a slow building heat. "My throat feels like I swallowed a pine cone," Leo whispered, his usual energy flagging. Ilara's stomach twisted. Illness was a luxury they couldn't afford. She walked him home, his small hand tucked into hers, his pace slower than usual. By the time they climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment, Leo's face was flushed, and his breathing was labored, a whistling sound accompanying every inhale. She sat him on the sofa, wrapping him in the quilt. "I'm going to make you some tea, okay? With the last of the honey." She went to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she filled the kettle. She looked at her phone. She had a 3rd shift tonight, cleaning the executive suites at Vanguard Tech. It was her highest-paying gig, the one that kept the lights on. She couldn't call out, but she couldn't leave Leo like this. She checked his temperature again. 102.4. "Mommy, it hurts to breathe," Leo said, his eyes glassy. Ilara felt a wave of panic so sharp it nearly took her knees out. She searched the medicine cabinet. Empty. She had $3. The walk-in clinic cost $50 just to see the nurse. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Leo, I need to run to the pharmacy, okay? I'll be back in 10 minutes. I'm just going to see if I can get you something to help you sleep." She ran. The evening air was turning to ice, the wind howling between the buildings like a wounded animal. She reached the 24-hour pharmacy, the fluorescent lights blindingly bright. She found the children's section. The liquid antibiotic, the one the doctor had mentioned months ago when Leo had a similar scare, was behind the counter. The over-the-counter chest rub and fever reducer were $18. She stood at the register, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Can I help you?" the pharmacist asked, a woman with a sharp bob and a look of permanent annoyance. "My son, he's got a fever and a cough. It sounds like he's struggling." Ilara placed the bottle of fever reducer on the counter. "How much is this?" $12.99 plus tax. Ilara reached into her pocket. She pulled out the $2.40. She felt the blood rush to her face. I only have this. Is there any way? I get paid on Friday. I can come back." The pharmacist's expression didn't soften. "I'm sorry. We can't do that. Policy." Please," Ilara whispered, her voice cracking. "He's 5. He's alone in the apartment and he's burning up. There's a free clinic 6 miles downtown. They open at 8 tomorrow morning." Ilara looked at the bottle. It was so small, such a simple thing. $12 stood between her son and a night of suffering. She felt a surge of hot, bitter anger, not at the pharmacist, but at the world that made a child's health a matter of policy. She walked out empty-handed. She ran back to the apartment, her lungs burning. Leo was where she left him, but he was shivering now. She held him, her tears falling into his hair. She felt so small, so utterly, devastatingly invisible. At 8 p.m., she had to leave for Vanguard Tech. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman who was 80 and half-blind, but had a heart of pure gold, agreed to sit with him for 4 hours. "Don't you worry, Ilara," Mrs. Gable said, patting her hand. "I've got the vapor rub. I'll keep him warm." "Thank you," Ilara sobbed. "I'll be back by midnight. I have to do this shift." Vanguard Tech was a monolith of glass and steel in the center of the financial district. It was a place of high-speed fiber optics and billion-dollar algorithms. Ilara entered through the service entrance, her badge clicking against the reader. She spent the next 3 hours in a daze of cleaning solution and vacuum hums. She scrubbed toilets used by men who made more in a minute than she did in a year. She polished mahogany desks that had never seen a speck of dust. She reached the 42nd floor, the executive level. This was the quietest part of the building. The carpets were thicker here, the air filtered and scentless. She moved through the corridors, a ghost in a blue uniform, her mind constantly drifting back to Leo. Was he breathing? Was the fever breaking? At 11:15 p.m., she sat down on the floor of a darkened break room, her back against a vending machine. She couldn't take it anymore. The isolation was too much. The fear was a living thing in her throat. She pulled out her phone. She needed to talk to her sister, Sarah. Sarah lived 3 states away and worked 2 jobs herself, but she was the only one who understood. With trembling fingers, Elara began to type. Her eyes were blurred with tears, her vision swimming in the blue light of the screen. Sarah, I'm scared. Leo's sick. It's his chest again. I went to the pharmacy and I didn't have enough money. I felt like such a failure standing there with my change. I'm at work now, cleaning these offices for people who don't even know I exist. I don't know what to do. I need $80 for the medicine and the nebulizer rental. I'll work 4 shifts to pay you back, I promise. I just need him to breathe tonight. Please, I'm drowning. She didn't double-check the number. She didn't notice that her thumb had slipped, hitting a 7 instead of an 8 in the area code. She just hit send and collapsed into a silent, racking sob, her forehead resting on her knees. 40 stories above the street, in a penthouse that felt more like a vault than a home, Silas Thorne was staring at a wall of monitors. The room was silent, except for the faint, expensive hum of a high-end air purification system. Silas was 34, but in the dim light he looked much older. His face was a map of sharp angles and deep shadows. He hadn't left this apartment in 4 months. Not since the accident. Not since the world had proven to him that no amount of money could buy back a single second of the past. He was a genius of logic, of code, of things that behaved according to set rules. People were different. People were chaotic. People broke. He picked up his phone, intending to check the overnight markets in Tokyo. Instead, he saw a notification. New message. Unknown number. He frowned. No one had this number. It was a private line, encrypted and unlisted. He opened it, expecting a phishing attempt or a wrong-dialed bot. Instead, he read the words of a woman who was drowning. He read it once, then again. He found himself standing up, moving toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, in one of those flickering lights, a woman was sitting in the dark, begging for $80 so her son could breathe. Silas felt a strange, long, dormant prickle at the back of his neck. He was a man who dealt in billions. $80 was the cost of the bottle of scotch sitting on his sideboard, a bottle he hadn't even opened. His first instinct was to delete it. He didn't do charity by accident. He had foundations for that. He had lawyers and accountants who handled the giving part of his life, so he didn't have to touch the messy reality of it. But the phrase, cleaning these offices for people who don't even know I exist, stopped him. He looked around his penthouse. He looked at the pristine surfaces, the lack of dust, the perfectly emptied trash bins. Someone had been here tonight. Someone had moved through his space, touching his things, ensuring his world remained perfect while theirs was falling apart. He looked at the number. The area code was local, but the middle digits were off by 1 from his own. He sat back down at his desk. His heart was thumping, a physical sensation he usually associated with a failing line of code. He shouldn't reply. It was a mistake. It was a wrong number. But the silence of the penthouse suddenly felt suffocating. He typed a reply, his movements slow and deliberate. "I think you have the wrong number," he wrote. He paused. His thumb hovered over the send button. He looked at the scotch. He looked at the empty, cold perfection of his life. He added, "But tell me which pharmacy, and tell me your son's name." He hit send. Down in the break room on the 42nd floor, Ilara's phone buzzed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her breath catching. She expected Sarah to say she'd try to find the money. She expected a sister's comfort. She saw the unknown number. She saw the text. Her heart leapt into her throat. She realized with a jolt of horror that she'd sent her deepest, most private shame to a total stranger. She felt a wave of nausea. She'd exposed her life to someone who didn't know her. "Oh, God," she thought. "They probably think I'm a scammer or a lunatic." She began to type a frantic apology. "I am so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. Please ignore that. I sent it to the wrong person. Please delete it." But then she looked at the last line of the stranger's text. "Tell me which pharmacy, and tell me your son's name." There was no judgment in the words. They were curt, almost clinical, but they weren't unkind. Ilara looked at the clock. 11:34 p.m. She had 26 minutes left of her shift. She thought of Leo's whistling breath. She thought of the pharmacist's cold eyes. She had nothing left to lose. Pride was for people who had a choice. She typed, "It's the CVS on 5th and G. His name is Leo. Please, if this is a joke, don't do this. I'm just a mother." A minute passed, then two. The silence of the break room felt heavier than before. She shouldn't have sent it. She was a fool. Then the phone buzzed again. "Go to the pharmacy when you finish your work. Everything will be there. Don't thank me. Just get him home." Ilara stared at the screen until the words burned into her retinas. She didn't know who this was. She didn't know if it was real. But for the first time in years, the feeling of being invisible began to flicker. Someone, somewhere, had seen her. She stood up, grabbed her mop, and finished the floor of the 42nd level. She polished the glass doors of the CEO's suite, not knowing that on the other side of the city, that very CEO was watching the GPS coordinates of a pharmacy on his screen, waiting for a ghost to appear. The transition from the building to the street was a blur. Ilara ran. She didn't wait for the bus. She ran the 10 blocks to the pharmacy, her lungs screaming in the cold air. She pushed through the double doors, her uniform disheveled, her hair matted with sweat and rain. She approached the counter. The same pharmacist was there. I'm here for Leo," Ilara gasped, clutching the edge of the linoleum counter. The pharmacist looked at her, and this time her expression changed. It wasn't kindness yet, but it was confusion. "Leo, the boy from earlier." "Yes." The pharmacist reached under the counter and pulled out a large white bag. It was stapled shut and heavy. "A courier came by 10 minutes ago," the pharmacist said, her voice lower now. "Everything's been paid for. The antibiotic, the nebulizer, the infant vitamins, and this." She reached into a second bag and pulled out a stuffed lion with a golden mane. Ilara felt the world tilt. She took the bags, her fingers brushing the cool plastic. Who paid for it?" "He didn't give a name," the pharmacist said. "He just said it was for the mother who was drowning." Ilara walked out of the store into the freezing night. She stood on the sidewalk, the heavy bags in her hands, and looked up at the towering skyscrapers of the city. Somewhere up there, among the thousands of glowing windows, was a person who had reached down into her dark world and pulled her up. She pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the message thread. She wanted to say 1,000 things. She wanted to ask who he was. She wanted to tell him he'd saved her life. Instead, she followed his instructions. She didn't thank him. She typed, "I'm going home to him now. Thank you for seeing us." Up in the penthouse, Silas Thorne watched the message appear. He didn't reply. He watched the rain streak against his window, the city below looking like a circuit board of lost souls. For the first time in 3 years, the silence in his room didn't feel quite so empty. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her face. But he knew her son's name was Leo, and he knew that tonight, in one small apartment, the air would be a little easier to breathe. It was a small thing, a wrong number miracle. But as he closed his eyes, Silas felt the first faint vibration of a world he had tried so hard to forget, a world where people were more than just code. The hum of the nebulizer was the most beautiful sound Ilara had ever heard. It was a steady, rhythmic thrum, a mechanical heartbeat that filled the small, shadowed bedroom. A fine white mist puffed from the mask over Leo's face, carrying the medicine into his lungs. With every breath, the terrifying wet rattle in his chest grew fainter, replaced by the soft, clean whistle of air, reaching places it hadn't touched in days. Ilara sat on the edge of his bed, her hand resting on his small, warm shin. She was still wearing her blue work uniform, the scent of industrial floor wax clinging to her skin, clashing with the sterile, medicinal smell of the vapor. She hadn't taken her coat off. She hadn't even checked her bank account to see the finality of her zero balance. None of it mattered. Leo's eyes were closed, his long lashes casting feathery shadows on his pale cheeks. In his arms, he clutched the stuffed lion. It was absurdly soft, a golden-maned creature that looked far too expensive for their world. Leo had named it Goldie within minutes of waking up. "Mommy?" he whispered, his voice muffled by the mask. "I'm here, baby. Don't talk, just breathe." The man? The one who gave the lion? Is he a king? Ilara felt a lump form in her throat, thick and jagged. She smoothed a stray hair from Leo's forehead. "I don't know, Leo. Maybe. He's someone very kind." "I like him," Leo murmured, his eyes drifting shut again as the medicine did its work. "He smells like new cars." Ilara looked at the lion's tag. It didn't smell like new cars. It smelled like nothing. The scent of something untouched by the dust of a second-hand shop or the grime of a city bus. It was a pristine object in a fractured room. She pulled her phone from her pocket. The screen was cracked in the corner, a spiderweb of glass that distorted the text thread. She stared at the last message from the stranger. "Just get him home." She felt a strange magnetic pull toward the device. In a world that had spent 5 years telling her she was a burden, a statistic or an invisible servant, this blue-lit screen was the only place where she felt seen. But it was a terrifying kind of visibility. It was the gaze of a predator or a saint, and she wasn't sure which one was more dangerous to a woman with nothing left to lose. She typed, "He's breathing better now. The nebulizer is working. He won't let go of the lion. I don't know how to thank you. I don't have anything to give you back." She waited. The silence of the apartment felt different now. Usually the silence was heavy, a reminder of her isolation. Tonight, it felt expectant. The phone buzzed. "I didn't ask for anything back." "Sleep, Ilara. You've been awake for 19 hours. She gasped, her heart skipping a beat. "How do you know my name?" A long pause. The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared. "You sent it in your first message." "To your sister." "Sarah, it's Ilara, remember?" She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Right, of course. She was being paranoid. The exhaustion was playing tricks on her mind. "Right. Sorry," she typed. "I'm a little tired. A little is an understatement. Go to bed." "Who are you?" she asked, the question finally bursting out of her. "A wrong number," he replied. Nothing more. Silas Thorne sat in the dark of his study, the only light coming from the 3 monitors that displayed the architectural blueprints of a new server farm in Singapore. But his eyes weren't on the schemes. They were on the small smartphone lying face up on the desk. A wrong number. Nothing more. He lied. He was a man who prided himself on precision, yet he had just told a blatant lie. He wasn't nothing more. He was the man whose company held the lease on the very air she breathed while she worked. He was the man who could buy the pharmacy where she'd stood crying. He looked at his hands. They were steady, but he felt a strange vibration deep in his chest. For 3 years, he had curated a life of total emotional sterility. After the crash, after the glass had shattered and the world had gone silent, he had decided that the only way to survive was to stop participating in the human experiment. He dealt in data because data didn't bleed. Data didn't have sick children. Data didn't have drowning voices. But this woman, this Ilara, was a glitch in his system. He found himself wondering what she looked like. In his mind, she was a blur of blue, the blue of the text bubbles, the blue of the night, the blue of the uniform he'd seen the cleaning crews wear. He thought about his office on the 42nd floor. He thought about the smudge-free glass he took for granted every morning. He stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out below him, a carpet of amber lights. Somewhere down there, in a place where the elevators were slow and the heaters rattled, she was watching a child breathe. The next night, Silas did something he hadn't done in years. He stayed in his office past 8 p.m. He told his security detail to take the night off, claiming he had a deep-dive coding session and didn't want to be disturbed. He sat in his glass-walled sanctum, the lights dimmed to a low golden glow. He wasn't working. He was waiting. At 9:15 p.m., he heard it, the faint, rhythmic thwack-slosh of a mop, the metallic rattle of a janitor's cart. He froze. He was a man who commanded boards of directors, who had stood before congressional subcommittees without blinking. But as the sound of the cart drew closer, his pulse quickened like a teenager's. Through the frosted glass of his office door, he saw a silhouette. It was slender, the shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. She, the shadow, didn't enter his office. She started with the hallway. He watched her through the gap in the blinds. She moved with a weary grace. She wasn't just cleaning. She was performing a ritual. She wiped the brass handles with a microfiber cloth, her movements precise. She didn't look up. She kept her gaze on the floor, on the dust, on the work. Was this her? Was this the woman who had texted him? He pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over her contact. "Are you at work?" he typed. He watched the shadow through the glass. She stopped. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, glowing device. The light from the screen illuminated her face for a fraction of a second, just enough for him to see the curve of a tired jaw, the bridge of a straight nose, and eyes that looked like they were searching for a way out of a dark room. His phone buzzed. Yes. The night shift. It's quiet here tonight. Silas felt a jolt of electricity. It was her. She was standing 6 feet away from him, separated only by an inch of tempered glass and a universe of social standing. She was cleaning his floor, and he was the god of the building, and between them was a lie that felt more like a lifeline. "Is Leo okay?" he asked. He watched her type. Her fingers moved slowly, as if she were savoring the conversation. "He's better. He's with my neighbor. He wanted to bring the lion to sleep with him, but I told him Goldie had to stay on the bed to guard the room." Silas felt a ghost of a smile touch his lips. "Goldie? He says it's because the lion has a golden mane like a king. Kids have such big imaginations, don't they? They see magic in things that are just things. Maybe they see what we've forgotten how to see," Silas replied. The shadow in the hallway stayed still for a long time. She was leaning against the wall now, the mop handle resting against her shoulder. She looked small against the vast, cold architecture of the Vanguard Tech headquarters. "Everything okay out there?" Silas nearly jumped. It wasn't him who had spoken. It was the night security guard, a man named Miller, who had appeared at the end of the hall. The shadow, Ilara, jumped, nearly dropping her phone. "Oh, yes, Mr. Miller. Just checking the time." Get a move on, Ilara," Miller said, not unkindly, but with the casual authority of someone who had a badge. "The 44th floor had a spill in the break room. They need you up there." "I'm going," she said. Silas watched her pull the cart away, the rattle of the plastic wheels echoing in the empty corridor. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of anger at Miller, at the building, at himself. Get a move on, as if she were a horse, as if she weren't a mother who had just spent her last cent on a nebulizer. He looked at his office. It was too big, too empty. He looked at the chair he was sitting in, a $4,000 piece of ergonomic engineering. He looked at the guest chairs across from his desk. He got up and walked out into the hall. He went to the supply closet where the cleaning crews kept their gear. He saw her spare rags, the bottle of heavy-duty degreaser, and a small plastic container with a single half-eaten sandwich inside. A peanut butter sandwich. The bread was white and cheap, the edges curling. He felt a physical ache in his throat. He went back to his office and grabbed his phone. "I have a confession," he typed. He waited until he saw her online status appear. "What is it?" she replied. "I work in one of these buildings too. Late nights, I see the people who clean. I realize tonight I've never even said hello to them. I feel like a fool." "Don't," she replied. "Most people don't see us. It's okay. We're used to it. It's easier to clean a room when people think you're part of the furniture. You don't have to apologize for being busy. It's not about being busy. It's about being human. You're plenty human," she wrote. "You saved Leo. That's more human than anyone I've met in a long time." Silas sat down on the floor of his office, his back against the glass. He didn't care about the suit he was wrinkling. "I'm drowning," she had said. "Tell me about your dreams, Ilara. Not the how do I pay the bills dreams, the real ones." A long silence. "I used to want to be a restorer," she finally wrote. "Old books, old paintings. I like the idea of taking something that's been forgotten or damaged and making it whole again. I like the smell of old paper and linseed oil. I used to have an apprenticeship before life happened. Why did you stop? Leo's father left before he was born. My mother got sick. The apprenticeship didn't pay, and the bills didn't care about my passion for 18th century vellum. So I traded the linseed oil for bleach. It was a fair trade, I guess. Leo is worth more than any book." Silas closed his eyes. He could almost smell it. The linseed oil. The dust of history. He thought of his own damaged state. He was a man with a shattered soul, surrounded by the newest, most expensive things in the world. He was the opposite of a restored book. He was a shiny new cover with all the pages torn out. "You should still be doing it," he wrote. "Maybe in another life. In this one, I'm just trying to make sure the glass is clear enough for the important people to see the sunrise." The irony was a knife in his ribs. The next day, Silas called his head of operations. "I want to make some changes to the night shift amenities," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Amenities, sir? For the custodial staff?" "Yes. I noticed the break room on 42 is inadequate. I want high-end ergonomic seating installed. I want a stocked pantry, fresh fruit, high-protein snacks, good coffee, not the sludge from the vending machines, and I want the staff to have access to the gym and the showers if they need them." "Sir, that's highly unusual. The contract with the cleaning company." "Rewrite the contract. And tell them if I hear of one person being reprimanded for taking a break in those chairs, I'll terminate the entire agreement." "Understood, Mr. Thorne." But Silas wasn't done. He went to a boutique stationery store during his lunch break, a place he hadn't visited in years. He bought a set of restoration tools, fine-tipped brushes, a magnifying glass with a built-in LED, and a book on the preservation of 19th century manuscripts. He wrapped them in plain brown paper. That night, he left the package on his desk with a small note. "For the person who makes the glass clear, your work is seen. Please take this." He hid in the darkened lounge down the hall, watching through the security feed on his tablet. He saw Ilara enter his office. He saw her stop, her mop bucket clicking to a halt. She approached the desk with a look of confusion. She picked up the package. He watched her hands tremble as she unwrapped it. When she saw the brushes, she let out a small, soft sound, a gasp that the microphone on the camera barely caught. She touched the bristles of the finest brush with the tip of her finger. She didn't look for a camera. She didn't look for a person. She simply sat down in his executive chair, the new, comfortable one he'd ordered, and she wept. It wasn't a sob of sadness. It was the sound of a person who had been starving for a drop of recognition and had finally been given a well. His phone buzzed. "He did it again," she wrote. "The man from the building. He left me something. How could he know? How could he possibly know about the restoration?" Silas typed back, his heart racing. "Maybe he's paying attention. Maybe you're not as invisible as you think." "I'm scared," she wrote. "Why?" "Because when people are this kind, they usually want something. And I don't have anything left to give. Maybe he just wants you to know that you matter, Ilara. Maybe that's enough of a reward for him." "Do you think he's real?" she asked. "Or am I finally losing my mind from the lack of sleep?" "He's real," Silas wrote. "As real as the air in your lungs." Over the next 2 weeks, the digital sanctuary became the center of their lives. They texted every day, not just at night, but during the in-between moments. Silas would text her when he was in a board meeting, bored out of his mind by talk of profit margins. "The man in the blue suit has been talking for 40 minutes about synergy. I think I've forgotten what a real word sounds like." Ilara would reply from the laundry room, her phone hidden behind a stack of towels. "Synergy sounds like a type of laundry detergent. Does it get out wine stains?" "It doesn't even get out the smell of pretension," he'd reply. They became each other's secret. To the world, Silas Thorne was a cold, reclusive genius who was slowly losing his grip on his empire. To Ilara, he was the wrong number, the man who understood the weight of a silent apartment and the beauty of a restored page. To the world, Ilara was the woman who emptied the trash. To Silas, she was the restorer, the woman who saw the world through a lens of potential beauty rather than just utility. But the real world was not content to leave them in their digital bubble. The conflict began on a rainy Tuesday. Ilara was picking up Leo from school when she saw a black sedan parked at the curb. A man stepped out, a man with a sharp, expensive haircut and a face that Ilara hadn't seen in 3 years. Marcus, Leo's father. He looked successful. He looked polished. He looked like the kind of man who had never cleaned a toilet in his life. "Ilara," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of the cruelty she remembered, which made it even more terrifying. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" She pulled Leo closer to her side. Leo looked up, sensing the tension, his small hand gripping the ghost lion he'd insisted on bringing. "I've been doing well, Ilara. I have a firm now, a house in the suburbs." "Good for you. Stay there." "I want to see him," Marcus said, gesturing to Leo. "I want to be a part of his life. You lost that right when you told me to choose between him and your reputation 5 years ago." Marcus stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "I've changed, Ilara, and I've noticed you haven't. I did some checking. You're working 3 jobs? You're living in a studio above a garage? Is that a healthy environment for my son?" "He's my son," she hissed. "The courts might see it differently. Stability matters, Ilara. I have it. You don't. I'm not saying I want to take him away yet, but I'm filing for joint custody. You'll be served by the end of the week." He got back into his car and drove away, the tires splashing muddy water onto Ilara's boots. She stood on the sidewalk, the world spinning. She felt the old, familiar weight of the drowning return, but this time the water was ice-cold and filled with jagged rocks. That night, she didn't clean the 42nd floor. She sat in the supply closet, her head in her hands. Her phone buzzed. It was Silas. "You're late tonight. Is everything okay?" She didn't want to tell him. She didn't want to ruin their sanctuary with the filth of her real life. But the words came out anyway, a torrent of fear. The father. He's back. He wants to take Leo. He says I'm not stable because I'm poor. He has lawyers and a house and a car, and I have a mop and a broken phone. He's right, isn't he? I can't protect him. Up in his penthouse, Silas felt a cold, sharp rage ignite in his gut. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. "He's not right," Silas typed, his fingers flying over the keys. "Money isn't stability. Love is, and he doesn't have that." "The law doesn't care about love," Ilara replied. "The law cares about square footage and bank balances." "Then we'll give them something else to care about," Silas wrote. He stopped. "We?" He had used the word "we." He had crossed a line he'd sworn never to cross. He was becoming part of the story. "What do you mean?" Ilara asked. Silas stood up. He looked at the city. He looked at the monolith of Vanguard Tech. He realized that for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't afraid of the world. He was afraid for her. "I mean that you're not alone, Ilara. Not anymore." "I don't even know your name," she wrote, a small, heartbreaking admission of the fragility of their bond. "My name doesn't matter," he replied. "What matters is that he can't win. He's fighting a woman who has nothing. He doesn't realize that makes you the most dangerous person in the room." "I don't feel dangerous," she wrote. "I feel like I'm breaking." "Then let me be the one to hold the pieces together for a while," Silas wrote. "Just for tonight. Go home. Be with Leo. I'll handle the rest. How? Trust me." Ilara left the building, her heart heavy, but a small spark of hope flickering in the darkness. She didn't see the black SUV pull up to the service entrance as she left. She didn't see Silas Thorne step out, his face set in a mask of cold determination. He didn't go to his office. He went to the security room. "Miller," he said to the guard, "Mr. Thorne, I thought you were in for the night. I need the contact information for the man who served papers to one of our custodial staff today. His name is Marcus Vance, and I want a full background check on his firm." "Sir, that's out of our jurisdiction." Silas leaned over the desk, his eyes burning. "Everything in this city is my jurisdiction if I want it to be. Get it done now." As the guards scrambled to comply, Silas looked at the security monitors. He saw the empty hallway of the 42nd floor. He saw the mop bucket she'd left behind in her haste. He realized then that he was no longer just a wrong number. He was a man who had found something worth restoring, and he would burn the city down before he let anyone tear it apart. But as he looked at the screen, a new fear took hold. The digital sanctuary was crumbling. He was moving into her world, and she was moving into his. And the closer they got, the more the lie of their anonymity began to feel like a ticking time bomb. What would happen when she realized the man who saved her was the same man she'd spent months cleaning up after? Would she see a savior? Or would she see a man who had been playing with her life from a glass tower? He pulled out his phone. "Meet me," he typed. He stared at the words. "The ultimate risk. Saturday, 2 p.m. The conservatory at the park. Wear something green so I can find you." He hit send. The silence that followed was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. The legal envelope was the color of a dead wasp, a dry, sickly yellow that seemed to hum with a low-frequency threat on Ilara's kitchen table. It sat next to the restoration brushes Silas had gifted her, the fine camel hair of the smallest brush catching the morning light. The contrast was a physical ache in her chest. On one side, the tools of a dream she had forgotten she was allowed to have. On the other, the weapon of a man who intended to take the only thing that made those dreams worth having. Saturday morning arrived with a sky the color of wet slate. Ilara moved through the apartment in a trance of nervous energy. Leo was at Mrs. Gable's for the afternoon, a special treat that Elara had paid for with the last of her physical and emotional reserves. She had spent $22 at a thrift store on a dress she couldn't afford, a deep emerald green wrap dress that smelled faintly of lavender and someone else's memories. It was the something green Silas had asked for. As she pulled the fabric over her head, she felt like an imposter. The silk, or the imitation of it, felt too smooth against skin that was accustomed to the coarse friction of a janitor's uniform. She looked in the cracked mirror, adjusting the neckline. She didn't look like the woman who scrubbed the toilets of Vanguard Tech. She looked like a woman who could go to a conservatory. She looked like a woman who could be loved by a man who spoke in poetry and miracles. But then she looked at her hands. The skin around her nails was stained with the faint, persistent grey of industrial dust. No amount of scrubbing could remove the way the bleach had thinned her cuticles. She hid her hands in the folds of the dress, her heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm. "What am I doing?" she thought. "He's going to see me. He's going to see the grey in my skin, and the tired in my eyes, and the magic will evaporate. The wrong number will realize he made a very right decision to stay away from a life as broken as mine." Her phone buzzed on the table. "I'm leaving now," Silas wrote. "The air is cold, but the conservatory is warm. I'll be near the Victorian ferns. I'm holding a book with a red cover. I'm the man who looks like he doesn't know what to do with his hands." Elara smiled, a small, fragile thing. "I'm on my way. I'm the woman who looks like she's holding her breath." She stepped out into the rain, clutching her coat tightly around her. She had to walk 6 blocks to the bus stop. The wind caught the hem of her green dress, whipping it against her legs. She felt exposed, a bright spark of color in a graying world. She was 3 blocks away when the black sedan appeared. It didn't speed. It drifted to the curb with the silent, predatory grace of a shark. The window rolled down. Marcus didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was a far more effective way to shatter her. "Going somewhere, Elara?" he asked, his eyes traveling over the green dress. "You look expensive. Is this where the child support money would go? To silk and social outings while our son lives in a fire trap?" "I'm going to a meeting, Marcus." "Move the car." "A meeting? With who? The mysterious benefactor you've been bragging about to the neighbors?" Marcus opened the door and stepped out. He was tall, wearing a charcoal coat that cost more than Elara made in a month. He stood in her path, blocking the sidewalk. "I had my lawyers do a check on your stability, Elara. You've been missing shifts. You've been receiving unidentified gifts at your place of work. It looks like solicitation, Elara. It looks like the kind of thing a judge finds very interesting in a custody hearing." "It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the paperwork says. And the paperwork says you're an unfit mother who is distracted by a fantasy." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second envelope, white this time, stamped with a court seal. "Emergency hearing, Monday morning, 9 a.m. If you don't show up with a legal representative and a certified bank statement showing at least $10,000 in liquid assets for child stability, I'm taking him, Elara. Not joint custody. Full. You can see him on Christmas." "Maybe." The world tilted. The sound of the rain hitting the pavement became a deafening roar. Elara looked at the envelope. $10,000. It might as well have been 10 million. "You can't do this," she gasped. "I am doing it. Because I can. Because I'm the one who can give him a life, and you're the one who can only give him a cough." Marcus stepped back into the car. "Enjoy your meeting. I hope he's worth the price of your son." The sedan pulled away, leaving a plume of exhaust that tasted like ash in her mouth. Elara stood on the sidewalk, the white envelope clutched in one hand, her phone in the other. She looked down at the screen. Silas was waiting. He was sitting near the ferns, holding a red book, looking for a woman in a green dress. She looked at her reflection in a shop window. The green dress now looked like a shroud. She wasn't a restorer. She wasn't a romantic lead in a digital sanctuary. She was a woman who was about to lose her son because she had dared to look up from the floor she was scrubbing. She couldn't go. If she went to him now, she would be a beggar. She would be the drowning woman all over again, and she couldn't bear to see the pity in his eyes when he realized the magic was just a desperate woman with a court order. She turned around and ran. She didn't go back to her apartment. She ran toward the only place where she was allowed to be invisible. Silas Thorne sat on a stone bench in the conservatory, the humidity of the tropical room making his suit feel heavy. The scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine was overwhelming, a sensory ghost of a world he had long ago abandoned. He held the red book, a first edition of Great Expectations, his fingers tracing the embossed gold lettering. He was sweating, his heart a frantic bird in a cage of ribs. He checked his watch. 2:15 p.m. She was late. "It's the rain," he told himself. "The buses are slow. She's nervous. She's looking at herself in the mirror, wondering if I'll like the dress." He looked at every woman who walked through the glass doors. A grandmother in a yellow raincoat, a young couple holding hands, a teenager in a hoodie, no green dress. 2:45 p.m. The light in the conservatory began to shift, the grey afternoon deepening into a premature twilight. Silas felt a cold, familiar dread seeping into his marrow. This was the feeling of the hospital waiting room. This was the feeling of the phone call that never came. This was the silence of the void. Did she find out? He wondered. Did she see my face in a magazine and realize who I was? Does she hate me for the tower? He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped it. "Ilara, I'm here. Are you okay?" No reply. 3:30 p.m. The conservatory staff began to clear the tables in the nearby cafe. Silas stayed on the bench, a statue of a man in an expensive suit, surrounded by ferns that had survived for 100 years while he was crumbling in an hour. 4 p.m. He stood up. His legs felt like lead. He walked out of the glass building, the cold air of the park hitting him like a physical blow. He stood in the rain, the red book tucked under his arm, and realized that the wrong number had finally disconnected. He had tried to reach out of his vault, and the world had reminded him why he'd locked himself inside in the first place. He didn't go home. He couldn't face the silence of the penthouse. He drove to the Vanguard Tech building. He needed the sterile, artificial light of his office. He needed the data. He needed the world to be made of code again, because code didn't break your heart. Ilara was already there. She hadn't even gone home to change. She had thrown her blue uniform over the green dress, the cheap polyester scratching against the silk. She had picked up her mop and her bucket with a ferocity that bordered on madness. She was on the 42nd floor. She was scrubbing the floor of the hallway, her movements rhythmic and violent. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry and hot, her mind a spinning wheel of $10,000, $10,000, $10,000. She reached Silas's office. The door was unlocked, unusual for this time of night. She pushed her cart inside, the wheels squeaking on the thick carpet. The office was dark, save for the ambient glow of the city through the windows. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't want to see the mahogany. She didn't want to see the chair. She just wanted to work until her nerves went numb. She began to polish the glass partition that separated the main office from the private lounge. She sprayed the cleaner, a sharp citrus scent, and wiped in broad, aggressive circles. Clink. She stopped. Something had fallen from the desk. She leaned over to pick it up. It was a red book. She froze. Her heart stopped beating for a full second. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. Great Expectations, the red cover the stranger had said he would be holding. She looked at the desk. There, next to the keyboard, was a smartphone. It was face up. A notification was glowing on the screen. New message. Ilara, I'm here. Are you okay? The room began to spin. The air left her lungs. She looked at the phone, then at the book, then at the vast, empty office. You didn't come. The voice came from the shadows of the lounge. It was deep, textured, and laced with a pain so raw it made her knees buckle. Ilara turned. Silas Thorne was standing in the doorway. He wasn't the god of the building. He wasn't the billionaire. He was just a man with messy hair and a damp suit, his eyes filled with a devastating mixture of betrayal and longing. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the blue uniform. He saw the mop. He saw the green hem of the dress peeking out from beneath the polyester trousers. The silence between them was not a void, it was a collision. It was the sound of two worlds smashing together and finding they were made of the same broken glass. "It was you," Ilara whispered, the book falling from her hand and thudding onto the carpet. "The wrong number." "The man who paid for the medicine, the man who left the brushes, it was the man I clean up after." Silas took a step forward, his hand reaching out but stopping short of touching her. "I wanted to tell you. Every night I sat behind that glass and I wanted to walk out and tell you my name. But I was afraid." "Afraid?" Ilara let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. "You were afraid. You have everything. You have the tower and the money and the power. I'm the one who's drowning, Silas. I'm the one who's losing my son on Monday because I don't have $10,000. And you were playing a game with me." "It wasn't a game," Silas hissed, his voice cracking. "It was the only thing that felt real in 3 years. Do you think I care about the money? Do you think I care about this building? I would burn it all to the ground if it meant I could have 1 more hour of the woman I talked to on that phone." "The woman you talked to isn't real," Ilara screamed, the tears finally breaking through, hot and stinging. "She's a fantasy you built because you were bored. This is me, Silas. Look at me. I smell like bleach. My hands are rough. I'm the woman who empties your trash. That's all I'll ever be to a man like you." "Don't you dare," Silas said, stepping into her space, his presence overwhelming. "Don't you dare reduce what we have to a bank balance. I saw you, Ilara. Before I knew your name, before I knew your face, I saw your soul. I saw a woman who was fighting a war with nothing but her bare hands, and I fell in love with that woman." "You fell in love with a ghost," she sobbed, backing away. "And ghosts can't win custody battles. Ghosts can't protect their children from men like Marcus." She grabbed her phone from her pocket, the cracked, broken thing, and threw it onto his desk. "Keep your sanctuary, Silas. It was never mine." She turned and fled, her boots slipping on the floor she had just polished. She ran past the security desk, past the gleaming marble of the lobby, and out into the rain. Silas stood in the center of his office, the silence returning, heavier than ever. He looked at the 2 phones sitting on his desk, the encrypted $1,000 device and the cracked 5-year-old plastic one. He picked up her phone. The screen flickered to life. The last message he'd sent her was still there. "I'm here. Are you okay?" He felt a rage so cold it turned to ice in his veins. He looked at the red book on the floor. He realized that the time for digital sanctuaries was over. The time for being a wrong number was over. He didn't call his security. He didn't call his lawyers. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. He knew where she lived. He knew the name of the man who was trying to break her, and he knew that the only way to save a restorer was to become the tool she needed to fix the world. But as he stared into the dark, a new revelation hit him. He had lied to her. He had kept his identity a secret while she had bared her soul. He had been a voyeur of her tragedy. He wasn't the hero of this story. He was the architect of the very system that was crushing her. He picked up his desk phone. "Miller," he said, his voice as sharp as a razor, "get me the personal address of Marcus Vance and call the head of the legal department. Tell them they're going to work through the weekend. We're going to war." Ilara sat on the floor of her apartment, the green dress crumpled around her, the legal papers scattered like autumn leaves. She held Leo as he slept, her tears soaking into his hair. She felt a hollow, aching void where the wrong number used to be. The sanctuary was gone. The man who had seen her was just another ghost in a city of shadows. She looked at her hands in the dim light. They were still stained with the grey of the building. She realized then that Silas Thorne hadn't saved her. He had only shown her exactly how much she had to lose. Monday was coming. And for the first time in her life, Ilara didn't know if she had the strength to keep her head above the water. The silence of the 42nd floor was no longer the sterile, peaceful quiet Silas had cultivated for 3 years. It was heavy, pressurized, and tasted of the citrus-scented cleaning fluid Ilara had left behind. He stood by the window, his breath hitching as he watched her small, retreating figure vanish into the dark, rain-slicked belly of the city. On his desk, the 2 phones sat side by side. One was a masterpiece of sleek titanium, the other was a scarred piece of plastic with a spider-webbed screen. They looked like 2 different species that had no business being in the same room. He reached out and touched the cracked screen of Ilara's phone. It was warm, not from the battery, but from the heat of her hand, the hand that had just thrown it at him as if it were a piece of shrapnel. "You fell in love with a ghost." The words echoed in the cavernous office. Silas closed his eyes, and for the first time since the accident that had claimed his family and his peace, he felt the full, crushing weight of his own cowardice. He had stayed behind the glass because it was safe. He had used his wealth like a shield, a way to play at being a god without ever having to be a man. He had enjoyed the intimacy of her secrets while keeping his own life under lock and key. He wasn't a savior. He was a voyeur. He looked at the red book on the floor, the copy of Great Expectations he had held in the conservatory for hours, waiting for a woman who was too busy being threatened by her past to attend a fairy tale. He picked it up, the gold lettering mocking him. Pip, the orphan who was given a fortune by a secret benefactor, only to realize that the money came from a place of pain and darkness. The irony was a physical sickness. "Sir!" Miller, the security guard, stood in the doorway. He looked at the spilled bucket, the discarded phone, and the CEO who looked like he'd just been struck by lightning. "Mr. Thorne, the custodial manager is calling. They want to know why the 42nd floor hasn't been finished. They said Ilara is done," Silas said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "She doesn't work for them anymore. She doesn't work for anyone." "Sir, get my car and find out where Marcus Vance lives. I don't want his office address. I want the house he's so proud of." The apartment on 4th Street felt smaller than it had that morning. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and the faint, sweet scent of Leo's fever reducer. Ilara had stripped off the blue uniform, throwing it into the corner like a molted skin. She sat on the floor in her green thrift store dress, the silk imitation fabric feeling like a mockery against the worn linoleum. Leo was awake, sitting on the sofa with Goldie tucked under his arm. He was watching her with that preternatural quiet that children of struggle often possess. He knew the air in the room had changed. He knew the drowning was back. "Mommy," he whispered. "Yes, baby." "Did you see the king?" Ilara looked at the stuffed lion. The golden mane caught the flickering light of the street lamp outside. She thought of Silas in his office, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes had looked like they were searching for a language he'd forgotten how to speak. "The king doesn't exist, Leo," she said, her voice sounding hollow and metallic. "He was just a man in a tall tower, and towers are very far away from people like us. But he gave me Goldie. He made me breathe. He gave us a gift, Leo, but gifts aren't the same thing as staying." She stood up, her joints popping. She needed to pack. If Marcus was coming on Monday, she needed to be ready. She didn't know where she would go. She had no money, no car, and now no job. But she couldn't stay here. This apartment was a target. She began to pull suitcases from under the bed, mismatched bags with broken zippers. She stuffed Leo's clothes inside, her movements frantic and disjointed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the white envelope Marcus had handed her, $10,000. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. She looked at the restoration brushes Silas had given her. They were sitting on the table, pristine and beautiful. She grabbed them, intending to throw them into the trash, to purge every memory of the wrong number. But as her fingers touched the fine camel hair, she stopped. She remembered the text. Maybe he just wants you to know that you matter. But I don't matter, she thought, a sob finally breaking through her chest. I'm just the person who clears the glass. The knock at the door wasn't the polite, tentative tap of a neighbor. It was a heavy, authoritative thud. Ilara froze. Marcus. He was early. He was coming to take Leo now. Ilara, open the door! It wasn't Marcus. The voice was deep, textured, and vibrated through the wood of the door with a resonance that she recognized from her own soul. It was the voice of the man she'd talked to for months. It was the voice of the man she'd left in the tower. She walked to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pulled it open. Silas Thorne stood in the dimly lit hallway. He looked out of place in the cramped, peeling corridor of the tenement building. His charcoal coat was dark with rain, and his hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked exhausted, stripped of the armor of his office. Behind him, she could see a black SUV idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the rain like the eyes of a beast. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "You left your phone," he said. He held it out to her, the cracked screen reflecting the dim hallway light. "I don't want it. I don't want anything from you, Silas." "I know," he said, stepping closer. He didn't wait for an invitation. He moved into the room, his presence shrinking the already small space. He looked around, at the suitcases, the peeling wallpaper, the single bed she shared with her son. He looked at Leo. Leo stared up at him, his eyes wide. He looked at the man, then at the lion in his arms, then back at the man. "You're the king," Leo said. Silas stopped. He looked at the 5-year-old boy, and for a moment the CEO of Vanguard Tech disappeared. He sank to one knee on the linoleum, oblivious to the dampness of his expensive trousers. "I'm not a king, Leo," Silas said, his voice softening into something Ilara had never heard, a raw, paternal tenderness. "I'm just a man who forgot how to talk to people, and I owe your mother a very big apology." "Did you bring more medicine?" Leo asked. "I brought something better," Silas said. He looked up at Ilara, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "I brought the truth, Ilara, not the digital version, the real one." "The truth is that you lied to me for months," Ilara said, her voice trembling. "You watched me. You knew I was the one cleaning your office, and you let me pour my heart out to you while you sat in the dark and felt sorry for yourself." "I wasn't feeling sorry for myself," Silas said, standing up. "I was terrified. After the accident, I decided that the only way to avoid being hurt again was to never be seen. I became a ghost because ghosts don't lose anything. But then I got your text, and for the first time in years, I wanted to be visible. I just didn't know how to do it without the tower." "Well, you're visible now," she spat. "And what does it change? You're still a billionaire, and I'm still a woman about to lose her child. Your truth doesn't pay the $10,000 Marcus is demanding." "Marcus Vance is a bully," Silas said, his tone turning clinical and cold. "I spent the last 2 hours with my legal team. We didn't just look at your stability, Ilara. We looked at his. Do you know why he wants Leo now? It's not because he's changed. It's because his firm is under investigation for embezzlement, and he thinks a wholesome family image and a dependent child will help him avoid a prison sentence. He doesn't want a son. He wants a character witness. Ilara felt the room go cold. What? He's using you, Ilara. Just like he did years ago, but he made a mistake. Silas stepped toward her, his hand hovering near her shoulder, though he didn't touch her. He assumed you were alone. He assumed no one was looking out for the woman who cleans the glass. And you are? She asked, her voice cracking. Is this the part where you buy my life, Silas? Where you pay off the bad man and I become your newest restoration project? I'm not a book. I'm not a painting. I'm a human being, and I won't be a debt. Silas flinched as if she'd struck him. He looked at the restoration brushes on the table. I don't want to buy you, Ilara. I want to earn you, and I know I'm starting from a deficit of 0. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It wasn't a checkbook. It was a journal. When we were texting, he said, you told me that you liked the smell of linseed oil because it smelled like things being made whole again. I realized tonight that I'm the one who's broken. I've been broken for 3 years, and I've been using my money to hide the cracks. You're the only person who saw them, even when you didn't know my name. He held out the notebook. I've instructed my lawyers to handle Marcus, not with a payout, but with the evidence of his own crimes. He won't be seeing a courtroom for custody. He'll be seeing one for fraud. You don't owe me a cent for that. That's just justice. And then what? Ilara asked. You go back to your penthouse and I go back to another cleaning job? No, Silas said. I want you to take over the restoration of the archival library at Vanguard Tech. It's a real position, competitive salary, benefits, a place for Leo to grow. Not because I'm helping you, but because you're the best restorer I've ever met, even if you've only ever worked on your own dreams. Ilara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the man behind the money. She saw the grief he was still carrying, the way his hands shook slightly as he spoke. She saw the wrong number who had stayed up all night to make sure a child could breathe. Why didn't you just tell me? She whispered. At the pharmacy? At the office? Why wait until I was broken? Because I didn't think I was enough, Silas said, a single tear escaping and tracing a path through the rain dust on his cheek. I thought the only thing I had to offer you was the money. I thought that if you saw the man, the broken, lonely man who hides in a glass box, you'd realize the miracle wasn't a miracle at all. It was just a mistake. Ilara felt a wave of warmth, not the heat of a fever, but the slow, building glow of recognition. She reached out, her fingers finally grazing the sleeve of his wet coat. You were never a mistake, Silas. The wrong number was the only right thing that ever happened to me. For a moment, the world outside, the rain, the looming legal battle, the thousands of stories happening in the dark city, vanished. There was only the hum of the small apartment and the 2 people who had found each other through a glitch in the system. But the collapse wasn't over. A sudden, sharp glare of headlights flooded the small room as a car pulled up onto the sidewalk outside, its tires screeching. Blue and red lights began to dance against the peeling wallpaper. Ilara gasped, pulling Leo toward her. The police? Silas turned toward the window, his expression hardening. No, not the police. Marcus. The door to the apartment didn't just knock this time, it was kicked. The frame groaned, the wood splintering as Marcus Vance burst into the room. He didn't look like the polished executive from the sidewalk. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and he held a crumpled stack of papers in his fist. You think you can ruin me? Marcus screamed, his gaze locking onto Silas. I saw your car outside, Thorne. I know who you are. You're the guy who's been sniffing around my business. You're going to help this janitor take my son? He was never your son, Marcus, Silas said, stepping in front of Ilara and Leo, his voice calm but vibrating with a lethal edge. He was always her life. And you are a man whose life is currently collapsing under the weight of your own greed. I have the papers, Marcus yelled, waving the envelope. I have the hearing. You can't just buy the law." "I don't need to buy the law," Silas said. "I just need to show the law the truth. My lawyers have already filed the whistleblower report with the SEC, Marcus. By 9 a.m. Monday, you won't be in a custody hearing. You'll be in a bail hearing." Marcus lunged forward, his face contorted with a desperate animal rage. He didn't go for Silas. He went for the thing that he knew would hurt Ilara the most. He reached for Leo. "He's coming with me." Ilara let out a scream that felt like it was tearing her throat apart. She threw herself between Marcus and her son, her hands clawing at Marcus's expensive coat. "Don't you touch him!" she shrieked. Silas was faster. He grabbed Marcus's arm, twisting it with a strength born of years of pent-up isolation and a new, fierce, protective instinct. He slammed Marcus against the wall, the sound of the impact echoing through the small apartment. "Get out!" Silas hissed, his face inches from Marcus's. "If you ever breathe the same air as this woman or this child again, I will ensure that the rest of your life is spent in a cell so small you'll forget what the sun looks like. Do you understand me?" Marcus looked into Silas's eyes and saw something that no amount of money could buy. He saw the face of a man who had already lost everything once, and was prepared to kill to keep from losing it again. The fight left Marcus as quickly as it had come. He slumped against the wall, the papers falling from his hand. He looked small. He looked like the coward he had always been. "Go," Silas said, releasing him. Marcus didn't look back. He stumbled out of the apartment, the door swinging on its broken hinges. The silence that followed was heavy with the scent of ozone and adrenaline. Ilara was on the floor, clutching Leo, her body racking with silent, violent sobs. Leo was crying now too, his face buried in the golden mane of his lion. Silas didn't move toward them immediately. He stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving. He looked at his hands, then at the broken door. He realized that the collapse was complete. The tower was gone. The sanctuary was gone. The god was dead. He walked over to the floor and sat down beside them. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer a check or a speech. He simply put his arm around Ilara, drawing her and the crying boy into the circle of his warmth. He was a man sitting on a dirty floor in a crumbling apartment, and for the first time in 3 years, Silas Thorne felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "I've got you," he whispered into the dark. "I've got you both." The rain continued to beat against the window, a steady, rhythmic sound that felt like the city's heart. Monday was still coming. The hearing was still coming. The reconstruction would take years. But as Ilara leaned her head against Silas's shoulder, she felt the drowning stop. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't a ghost. She was a woman being held by a man who had finally learned that the only way to save someone is to let them save you back. Monday morning did not arrive with the dramatic fanfare of a thunderstorm or the cinematic swell of a symphony. It arrived with the pale, indifferent light of a winter sun crawling over the jagged horizon of the city's skyline. Ilara sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers tracing the hem of the emerald green dress. It was clean now, the scent of the rainy sidewalk washed away, but the memory of the weight of it remained. She didn't go to the courthouse. At 8:45 a.m., a courier had arrived at her door, not with a yellow envelope, but with a simple handwritten note on heavy cream cardstock and a digital tablet. The note was not from Silas. It was from a woman named Elena Vance, a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious family law firms. "The hearing has been vacated," the note read. "Mr. Vance has withdrawn his petition. Please use the enclosed device to view the public filings at 9 a.m. You are safe. Leo is safe." Ilara had sat on the floor with Leo, the tablet resting between them. She watched the scrolling text of the SEC filings, the dry legalistic language detailing the systematic dismantling of Marcus's career. It was cold, precise, and absolute. Marcus hadn't just lost a custody battle. He had lost the very status he had tried to use as a weapon. "Is the bad man gone, Mummy?" Leo asked, his eyes following the movement of her thumb on the screen. "Yes, Leo," Ilara whispered, the air in her chest finally feeling like it belonged to her again. "He's gone." "Did the king send him away?" Ilara looked at the ghost lion sitting on the sofa. "No, Leo. The truth sent him away. The king just helped turn on the lights so we could see it." 3 weeks later, Ilara stood in front of the brass-trimmed elevators of the Vanguard Tech headquarters. She wasn't wearing a blue polyester uniform. She was wearing a simple charcoal blazer and trousers, her hair pulled back in a neat, professional knot. In her hand, she carried a leather satchel containing the restoration brushes Silas had given her. She didn't use the service entrance. She walked through the main lobby, her heels clicking against the marble that she had once spent 4 hours a night buffing to a mirror shine. She felt the eyes of the security guards on her, not the dismissive, invisible gaze they gave the janitors, but a look of professional curiosity. She pressed the button for the 38th floor, the archival level. When the doors opened, she was greeted by the scent that had haunted her dreams for 5 years: linseed oil, old paper, and the dry, sweet vanilla smell of aging vellum. The archive was a vast, climate-controlled space filled with the history of the city's industrial evolution. It was a mess of neglected manuscripts and crumbling blueprints, a graveyard of history waiting for someone to bring it back to life. A woman in a lab coat met her at the desk. "You must be Ilara. I'm Sarah, the head of collections. We've been waiting for a specialist with your specific background in 18th century paper restoration. The backlog is daunting." Ilara ran her hand over a stack of 19th century shipping logs. The paper was brittle, the edges curling like the wings of a dying moth. She felt a surge of purpose so strong it made her fingers ache. "I know exactly where to start," Ilara said. She worked for 6 hours. She didn't look at the clock. She didn't think about the rent or the electric bill. She was lost in the delicate, meditative work of cleaning foxing from a map of the original harbour. She used the smallest brush, her movements precise and rhythmic. At 4 out p.m., a shadow fell over her workbench. She didn't jump. She didn't look up immediately. She finished the stroke she was working on, then slowly set the brush down on its wooden rest. "It's a different kind of glass, isn't it?" Silas said. He was leaning against the doorway, his hands in his pockets. He looked different than he had in the tower or on her apartment floor. The sharp, defensive edges of his posture had softened. He looked like a man who was no longer trying to hold up the weight of a building with his shoulders. "It's glass that protects things worth keeping," Ilara replied, finally turning to face him. "How is the work?" "It's hard. It's slow. Most of these pages have been ignored for so long, they don't know they can be whole again." She paused, her gaze steady on his. "Kind of like people." Silas walked into the room, his footsteps muffled by the archival carpet. He stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes traveling over the workbench. "I've been reading the text thread," he said quietly. "Which one? The wrong number or the miracle? The one where you told me that when you restore something, you're not just fixing the damage. You're acknowledging that the damage is part of the story." He looked at her, his expression raw and unfiltered. "I've spent 3 years trying to delete the damage from my life, Ilara. I thought if I hid the scars well enough, I wouldn't have to admit I was broken. And now? Now I realize that the scars are the only thing that made me hear your voice," he said. "If I hadn't been sitting in that dark office, hiding from the world, I would have just deleted your message as a mistake. I would have lived the rest of my life without ever knowing what it felt like to actually be seen." Ilara stood up, the distance between them feeling like a bridge that had already been crossed. I was a ghost to you, Silas, and you were a god to me. Neither of those things was real. I know, Silas said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it out to her. I want to delete the thread. Ilara frowned. Why? Because I don't want to talk to the wrong number anymore, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. I want to talk to the woman standing in front of me. I want to know what you want for dinner. I want to know what Leo wants to be for Halloween. I want to know what color you want to paint the walls of a house that doesn't have a landlord. Ilara felt the last of the defensive walls in her heart crumble. It wasn't the offer of a house that did it. It was the way he said, Leo. It was the way he acknowledged that her life wasn't a project to be managed, but a world to be shared. I don't think we should delete it, she said, her hand covering his on the phone. We should archive it, like the maps. It's the original blueprint of how we found our way home. Silas smiled, a real luminous smile that reached his eyes. He took her hand, his thumb grazing the skin where the grey dust of the janitor's shift had finally faded, replaced by the faint, noble scent of linseed oil. I have something for you, he said. He led her out of the archives, through the building, and up to the 42nd floor. But they didn't go to his office. They went to the small break room where she had once sat on the floor and cried. The vending machines were gone. The flickering fluorescent light had been replaced by a warm, recessed glow. In the center of the room was a small, circular table with 3 chairs. On the table was a single framed photograph. It was a picture of the ghost lion sitting in a patch of sunlight on a restored oak table. I bought the building on 4th Street, Silas said, his voice steady, not to tear it down, but to restore it. It's going to be a foundation for single parents who are trying to finish their degrees. It's going to have a library and a restoration workshop. Ilara looked at the photo, then at the man who had once been a wrong number. You really are a restorer, aren't you? She whispered. I had a good teacher, he replied. He pulled her close then, the glass walls of the 42nd floor reflecting a city that was no longer a circuit board of lost souls, but a map of possibilities. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the skyscrapers in shades of gold and amber, the color of a lion's mane, the color of a king's crown, the color of a new beginning. Dinner? Silas asked, his forehead resting against hers. Only if Leo can come, she said. And the lion. The lion is non-negotiable, Silas agreed. As they walked toward the elevators, Ilara's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a notification from the school or a reminder from the archive. Instead, she saw a message from a number she had finally saved as Silas. I'm glad I stayed on the line, the message read. Ilara smiled, her thumb flying over the screen as the elevator doors opened, letting in the light of a world that finally, beautifully, saw her back. Me too, she typed. It was the right number all along.